Hello and welcome to our viewers in Korea and across the globe. I'm Ji-young, bringing you more of Arirang special live coverage of South Korea's 2024 general election. We're waiting to see a clearer picture of the results of who will take the seats in the 22nd National Assembly. Voters finished voting for a new National Assembly at 6 p.m. and now the ballot counting is well underway. And of course, it's going to take a couple more hours until we get a clearer picture. But just to give you a brief rundown of the results so far, our political correspondent Kim Do-yeon joins us in the studio. Welcome, Do-yeon.
Good to be here.
So Do-yeon, walk us through the estimates of the leading districts by parties.
Right. As of 11 p.m. Wednesday, that's around 4.5 hours since the vote counting started, the DP was leading with 154 seats out of the 254 districts. The People Power Party had 96 and others had 4. So again, that's according to KBS at 11 p.m. on Wednesday. Now, the number could change as we go deeper into the night with more ballots counted. Also, in the past, the counting of ballots from early voting was done after the election by election day votes. But during this election, that won't be the case, and each district will just be counting whatever comes first. Now, let's compare the current stats with what we saw from the exit poll results by KBS as well. The DP and its satellite party saw a range of 178 to 196 seats. The PPP and its satellite party saw 87 to 105, Semide 0 to 2, the New Reform Party 1 to 4, the Rebuilding Korea Party 12 to 14. What this exit poll suggested before was that opposition parties, the Rebuilding Korea Party and the DP and the Democratic United Party, the DP's satellite party, could in fact take more than 200 seats. Having 2/3 of the National Assembly seats means that when President Yoon vetoes a bill, it goes back to the National Assembly. The National Assembly votes for it again, and if 2/3 vote in favor of the bill, the veto will be overridden. Now, that makes President Yoon essentially powerless to stop a bill being passed by the opposition. But the current vote count as of 11 p.m. Wednesday, with the PPP holding 96 districts, kind of gives them room, and its satellite party should get more than 4 seats comfortably, looking at what's going on right now. So it's not looking as bad for the PPP when we saw the exit polls at the moment.
Right, Do-yeon, thank you, and we'll come back to you later. And as the number of vote counts changes, so does the atmosphere at each party's election headquarters in the National Assembly, where our correspondents are reporting from. We're going to take the parties in the order of their election number symbols. First, let's connect to the DP headquarters. Hayoung, what's it like there?
Ji-young, I'm currently at the headquarters of the Democratic Party of Korea, where, as you can see behind me, not many, but actually very few members of the election campaign committee are remained now after checking the exit poll results. And the DP leader Lee Jae-myung, who is also the co-chair of the election campaign committee, has returned to his constituency's election office, which is placed in the Incheon's Kwoung District, and watching the vote count there. And unlike the situation now, cheers and applause broke out at this site immediately after the exit polls were released, which showed that the combined seats for the DP and its satellite party, the Democratic United Party, are expected to range from 178 to 196, surpassing the party's target level, which was at least 151 seats. And despite such results, Lee Jae-myung was also clapping with the members, but was relatively calm compared to other members of the party as the final were yet to come out. Take a listen to what he said before leaving the site.
We will respectfully watch the decision made by the people until the end. Thank you.
Then Hayoung, what will the DP be watching for throughout the night?
Well, Ji-young, ahead of the election, the DP identified 50 districts as contested areas, while officially projecting to win 110 seats for elected lawmakers. And when the exit polls were announced based on the key battlegrounds, there were mixed reactions here in headquarters. For instance, applause broke out as the DP's candidates took the lead in the Bundang constituency in Gyeonggi-do province, as well as in Seoul's Dongjak DP district. However, regarding the Sahabe district in Busan, there were sides as the DP's candidate was announced to be behind. And the DP sees the exit polls as reflection of the public's judgment of the government, which the DP has been emphasizing throughout the election campaign. And there's optimism that areas such as Seoul-Dongjakdo district, where Lee Jae-myung campaigned several times, are showing positive survey results, indicating that his leadership will gain more strength going forward. Meanwhile, the DP's election campaign committee is scheduled to convene a meeting on Thursday at 10 a.m. to deliver an official message about the 22nd general election. Jiyoung.
Thank you, Ha-young. And now we go over to the headquarters of the National Assembly Library, where our Lee Si-hoo is standing by. How are things looking there, Si-hoo?
Right, Jiyoung, I am here at the National Assembly Library, where the People Power Party headquarters has been operating up until around 30 minutes ago. Now, the exit poll results were released just about 6 hours ago, much to the party's dismay, with the PPP and its satellite party expected to win around 87 to 105 seats. The air of disappointment filled the air at the time. Many actually left the room right after the results came out, leaving a lot of the seats here empty. Now, Han Dong-un, the interim leader of the party who took charge of its election campaign, also left the room soon after the poll results. Let's take a listen to what he said right before leaving.
We, the PPP, have done our best to do politics that follow the will of the people, but the exit poll results are disappointing. However, we will watch the ballot count results and how people chose until the end.
Throughout the day, Han has encouraged people to go out and vote on social media, counting down the hours left until voting officially closed, which probably made the disappointment even greater.
And Si-hoo, what will the PPP be watching for throughout the night?
Right, so the PPP has repeatedly aimed for a stop to a large majority opposition. In the previous National Assembly, out of a possible 300 seats, the People Power Party occupied around 114, which has repeatedly led to the opposition pushing for bills that were later vetoed by the president. The PPP's main priority during this election has been changing this structure so that the party and the administration can actualize more of their agenda. Now, what they really wanted to avoid is the case where the opposition across parties occupies over 200 seats. In this case, the opposition may use their large majority to push for a constitutional revision in the National Assembly and also restrict the president's veto right. The party has asked the people to give them enough seats and the power to do the work it wants to do. And this stance remains unchanged at the National Assembly right now as we speak. That's all I have for this hour, but I'll be back with more updates in a later newscast. Back to you, Jiyoung.
Thank you, Si-hoo. Our Lee Si-hoo and Shin Ha-young live from the National Assembly. Thank you. Now let's move on to the third parties that are also getting a lot of attention in this election. Our Kim Jung-sil reports.
As soon as the results of the exit polls were released at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, party reactions varied. As of 6 p.m., the number of seats expected to have been secured by 조국혁신당, or the Rebuilding Korea Party, is 12 to 14 more than the 10 that was originally hoped for. Party leader Cho-guk, a former justice minister, has risen as a dark horse during the election campaign period and has repeatedly vowed to, quote, bring justice to the incumbent. 개혁신당, or the New Reform Party, headed by former ruling People Power Party leader Lee Jun-seok, is looking at 1 to 4 seats. The party launched in January was hoping to secure 6 seats from this election. A lot of focus is also on whether the 39-year-old party leader Lee Jun-seok will win in his region and what is his 4th attempt to enter the National Assembly as a lawmaker, with fierce competition expected between a candidate from the Democratic Party. Moving on to the Saemilé Party led by former Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun, the party is looking at 0 to 2 seats. Experts say the party lost momentum ever since it decided to part ways with the New Reform Party back in February after just announcing it would amalgamate to show harmony and unitedness among the third parties. Last but not least, the Green Justice Party is looking at 0 to 2 seats, a significant decrease from its current 6. Formerly known as the Justice Party, it recently changed its name to the Green Justice Party, which experts say might have caused confusion with voters as they have been familiar with the name Justice Party for more than a decade. South Korea's 3 terrestrial broadcasters, KBS, MBC, and SBS, conducted a joint exit poll on about 500,000 voters at over 2,000 polling stations across the country and released their respective results at 6 p.m. Wednesday. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Now, votes are being counted for this election, and the preliminary outcomes are starting to take shape. For detailed analysis, we have Han Shettle, professor of political science at Yonsei University, here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Jiyoung. Nice to see you.
And we also have our correspondent Kim Do-yeon here with us as well. Welcome, Do-yeon.
Good to be here.
And Do-yeon, let's start with you before we delve deeper into the results. First, tell us briefly about how this election system works.
Right, so there's 300 seats up for grabs. There are 254 districts and 46 proportional representation seats available. That means the voters will get 2 ballots, one for their own district and one for proportional, which is nationwide. Generally speaking, you need 150 seats. You need majority to kind of pass bills by one party. So that's generally the goal for each party, to try to reach as close to 150 as they can. But obviously, from the last general election, DP had 180 seats. So until this point, they were able to pass bills just by themselves.
Right, this definitely is a high-stakes election. Now to you, Professor Shettle. It might take a few more hours before we get a better understanding, but what do the partial results so far in the polls tell us? I mean, are there any unexpected trends?
Well, it suggests very good news for the DP overall. And as Do-yeon was just saying, the DP and I believe its coalition partners in the Assembly have been over that 180-seat threshold for the past couple of years, with President Yoon coexisting and giving him a lot of challenges over the past 2 years. So it's been more difficult for the Yoon government to get its agenda through the Assembly. And of course, they had anything but a mandate when President Yoon won with less than 1% of the vote difference, the margin in 2 years ago. So now I think it may be getting even more difficult for the PPP, because the early numbers are suggesting that the seats for the PPP are going to go down significantly from the last Assembly election in 2020. It seems if we're looking at the seats only for the PPP, they might be below 100 when we're finished with this. And they've been above 100 for the past 4 years, not too very high above 100, but they were already at their lowest showing historically since, I believe, the 1988 election when Roh Tae-woo was the leader of the Conservative Party. So if we look at the history of the Conservative Party in this country, whatever we call it, from 1988 to the present, the PPP was already going into this election from the past 4 years at a low point, significantly since 2008, when they were a bit higher, when Lee Myung-bak was elected and then Park Geun-hye was elected. And they still had about, I think, 120 seats or so when Park Geun-hye was elected. They were down a bit at that point from 150 earlier, but now they're below 100. So this suggests a decade-long slide for the PPP. And its forebears in the conservative side that is accelerating and intensifying, and is going to have to prompt some real soul-searching within that party as to how they're going to convince the country to have more confidence in them, despite their presence at the Blue House right now.
Right, it seems like a slide for the ruling PPP. But what would define a landslide victory, or at least the satisfactory results for the parties? How many seats are they expecting to secure?
Right. Well, there are a few ways to think about landslides in the Assembly. And one, and this isn't really a landslide, but one is, does a single party have 150 seats where they can get things done, basic things done, like pass budget bills, pass legislation in the Assembly, without having to rely on any coalition partners? And the DP, if they can get over 150 seats, that's simple majority, they've got that threshold cleared. It seems that they will. So then the question shifts to the higher numbers. Can they get 180 seats in which they can end filibusters and fast track certain forms of legislation? You know, that would be a maybe small-time landslide for the DP if they can do that. They've already been pretty close to that anyway, thanks to their coalition partners. The real question as to whether the DP emerges in a stronger position after this election is whether they can break that 200 barrier. When you get the DP and you get their offshoot party for the proportional representation votes, and you get parties like Cho Kuk's party, the Rebuilding Korea party, that will probably throw its weight in, whatever weight it has, it'll throw it in with the DP. If all those parties put together give the DP and its coalition partners more than 200 votes, then they can make life very difficult for President Yoon. They can initiate impeachment proceedings if they wish. They have an easier time overriding presidential vetoes. They can call for constitutional amendments. That 2/3 threshold in the Assembly gives whichever group of parties making it up an awful lot of leverage going forward. So that's what the DP is shooting for tonight. We're shooting for the moon, and it seems like the DP is in a position now where they could shoot for the moon. That's what we seem to have. So instead of just more of the same deadlock, which we've already had since President Yoon took office with divided government, we'll still have divided government. We'll still have a president with a lot of power built into that office. But the legislature, the single chamber assembly, is going to be better positioned than before to make life difficult for the president.
Right. We'll have to watch and see what happens. And turning to you, Do-yeon, tell us about some of the key figures who have been making a significant impact in this election.
Right, and if we talk about key figures, especially for the main parties, we can talk about DP's leader, former, and Lee Jae-myung, who was obviously the former presidential candidate for DP. He is running currently for Kwoung District, and from the polls leading up to the election, it was clear he was going to get the seat, retain, because he's an incumbent. Now, he had certain things that was facing against him. So he had legal battles, and in fact, he was actually at the prosecutor's office just on the day before the election, facing some questions. So the question was whether the voters will see the leader of DP and kind of question the main opposition parties, their values, or see if he could be legally questioned and could be charged with some criminally charged. And so was that going to be the risk, was the question. So that was a huge impact to the voting day for this one. And also PPP was led by Han Dong-un, a close confidant of President Yoon. He came in and he declared that he's not going to run for any of the seats, not even the proportional seats or any specific district, and he just was the interim leader and led the party. And he has been very long friends with President Yoon. During the election season, the campaign, there was a tussle with the presidential office and Han Dong-un. So that was something that posed certain reactions that kind of saw how are voters going to react to this. So is the ruling PPP in line with the presidential office? So that was a big question, right? Now, I want to bring in President Yoon to this because this is a midterm election. And South Korea doesn't see midterm elections that often, right? Because the general election happens every 4 years and presidential election happens every 5 years. Now, in the US, every election happens in 2 years. So a US president sees midterm elections all the time. But for the top office here, they don't see it often. Now, there have been presidential offices with low approval ratings that beat the odds and and won the general elections before. But the big question was, how are voters right now seeing what presidential office was doing? Are they approving this? And this is a very important way to see. And as Professor Shadow said, this could actually stop President from exercising his vetoes, and he's done that 9 times so far. So we'll see how it goes.
Right, Do-yeon. And speaking of figures, tell us about some of the minor parties that have gained attention leading up to this election.
Right, so most notable ones are Rebuilding Korea Party, Semide Party, and New Reform Party. And we saw a report from Jeongsil just before this. Rebuilding Korea Party is led by Cho Guk, a former justice minister under former President Moon Jae-in. They're considered to be opposition to President Yoon and the ruling PPP party. So they could really be the tip of the scale. If DP and its satellite party has close to 190, and if, as the exit polls show, Rebuilding Korea Party has more than 10, the opposition together, like you said, the coalition could go over 200, right? So they are making significant impact to this election. Now, the other two, Semide Party and New Reform Party, aren't making that big of an impact to the election at the moment, but when they did start, Semide came from DP, they started a new progressive party, right? And New Reform Party was a conservative party that broke out from PPP. The leaders of both parties used to be leaders of those main, progressive and conservative parties. So they saw the needs for a new choice for progressive and conservative voters. So that's why for this election, they try to gain as much seats as possible. But looking at the exit polls, it doesn't seem like they will make a significant impact at the moment.
Right, thank you, Do-yeon, and we'll talk later about more developments. And as we gradually get a better understanding of the results, it's going to be a long night for election workers counting ballots. We're now a couple of hours into the vote counting for South Korea's 22nd general election. To update us on the process, our Lee Soo-jin joins us from one of the vote counting facilities here in Seoul. Soo-jin, how far have things progressed?
Hi, Chiang. It's already past midnight. I'm currently at the Seoul National University Gymnasium, one of the 254 venues nationwide where the ballots are being counted. You can see the democracy at work right here with the more than 600 workers just at this station. They're taking a quick break right now, but they have been working tirelessly to process the ballots. And they're expected to work well throughout the night because the vote counting process is expected to take 2 hours longer than the last general election. There has been an extra step added to the vote counting process to further ensure accuracy. As of 11 p.m., the percentage of votes counted nationwide for constituencies stands at 54.9%, so we still have a rather long way to go before the vote counting process is completed.
Right, Soo-jin, you mentioned how there has been a step added to this year's vote counting process. Can you tell us what the change is and what sort of impact it'll have when we do eventually find out about the results?
Should also briefly go through the vote counting process here. Without a doubt, accuracy is the main focus. Just hours ago, when enough ballot boxes were delivered, the chairman of each district's election commission formally declared the start to the ballot counting process. Staff then started unfolding the ballots and manually sorted them into proportional representation and district. These were then passed to the tables next to them where the district ballots were fed into the ballot sorting machines. The additional step is where the ballots are being double-checked by hand for the first time in nearly 30 years to ensure that the sorting has been done correctly. The NEC said the newly added step is likely to add around 2 hours to the process compared to the last general election. And the proportional ballots are being sorted by hand just like they were in the previous election because they're too long for the machines. They're the longest ever at 51.7 centimeters due to the record 38 political parties on the ballot. Machines are then used to count the sorted ballots, with the staff and volunteers overseeing the process. The NEC predicts that it will be around 4 a.m. when the vote counting for the constituencies is completed, and around 6 a.m. for the proportional representation seat. So basically, it's expected to be a long night for everyone. And that's all I have. Back to you, Jiyoung.
Thank you, Soo-jin. That was our Lee Soo-jin live from one of the counting stations in Seoul. Thank you. And millions of Koreans headed to the polls today to decide who would be part of the new 300-member National Assembly. Voters showed their passion for democracy and exercised their right to vote. Our Moon Hae-ryun was on the site and at one of the polling stations.
Voting kicked off at over 14,000 different polling stations around the country, such as the one behind me, for people to cast their votes in this year's parliamentary elections. A steady stream of people headed to polling stations on Wednesday to cast their ballots for a new 300-member National Assembly. And at these polling stations, some differences between the last general election in 2020 and the general election this year could be seen. This year, the ballot paper for proportional representation seats is 51.7 centimeters long, with 38 parties running, making it the longest ever used in Korea. It's longer than the last parliamentary election in 2020, when the ballot paper was over 48 centimeters long, with 35 parties running. The voters this year were also a little different from the previous general election 4 years ago, due to the country's aging population. It's the first time ever that the number of voters above the age of 60 has surpassed that of those in their 20s and 30s, and pundits are dubbing this year's general election a grey election. According to the National Election Commission, those in their 20s and 30s made up just over 28% of voters, while those aged over 60 years old accounted for nearly 32%. But voters young and old all spoke of their hopes that led them to place their votes, with some coming to vote for the first time and some having voted in several previous general elections.
What I and the rest of the country wants is a prosperous country with people who are happy and treated equally.
It's my first time voting, so I did a lot of research before placing my vote. As someone who's part of the younger generation going to university, I'd like for politicians to listen to our needs and improve the job market.
These voters are hoping their voices will be heard. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And as we've just heard, ballot counting is currently underway. For the latest updates, let's go over to our reporter Song Yoo-jin at Arirang's very own virtual reality studio. Yoo-jin.
Well, good evening, Ji-young, and to our viewers tuning in. I'm Song Yoo-jin reporting from Arirang's brand new VR studio, here to help you take a look at some of the big races we've got our eyes on at this moment. So let's first begin with ballot counting. So the data from the country's National Election Commission as of 11 p.m. shows that 54.9% of the casted ballots have been counted. Now, this means that 16 million out of the more than 29 million votes that were casted are counted. Once again, the number of eligible voters here in the country for the 22nd general election was more than 44 million. But I think that the biggest question is, how are candidates performing at this hour? So here we divided Korea into 9 key battleground districts. We actually selected 9 key battleground districts. So let's first start with capital Seoul, Seoul's Jongno district. Now, this district is often called the center of Korean politics. This region isn't a stronghold for any specific party. We've got 3 candidates here. We have Democratic Party's Kwak Sang-won, People Power Party's Choi Jae-young, and Kim Tae-seop from the New Reform Party. And data as of 11 p.m. shows that Kwak is projected to win. Moving on to Seoul's second key battleground district, we have Yongsan, which is emerging as the new political center of Korea. So we've been seeing a really tight race between the 2 candidates throughout the campaigning period. We have Democratic Party's Kang Tae-woong, and then we have People Power Party's former Unification Minister Kwon Young-se. As of 11 p.m., as you can see from this graph, Kwon is leading against Kang Tae-woong. Moving on to Seoul's third key battleground, which is the Gangseo B district. We've been seeing a very tight, heated race here since the campaigning period. We have Democratic Party's Jin Sung-jun against People Power Party's Bang Min-sik, who is South Korea's former Minister of Patriots and Veterans Affairs. Polls as of 11 p.m. shows that Democratic Party's Jin Sung-jun is currently in the lead. Now, shifting to the final key battleground district in the capital, Dongjak B district in Seoul, we have 2 candidates. We have Democratic Party's Yoo Sam-young, People Power Party's Na Kyung-won. Data as of 11 p.m. shows that Na Kyung-won is currently leading against Yoo Sam-young. Now let's go outside of Seoul. Now this electoral district, we've been paying great attention. It's Incheon Gaeang B. The competition here has been often dubbed as a battle between Myeongyong. We have Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung against People Power Party's Won Hee-ryong, who is also the former Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. Polls as of 11 p.m. shows that Lee Jae-myung is currently leading right now. Now moving on to another district in the country, key battleground district, is Hwaseong-bi in Gyeonggi-do Province. Now this region is made up of fairly young voters, and it's actually part of the country's so-called semiconductor belt, a key export item here in Korea. We can see that from the data from 11 p.m., New Reform Party leader Lee Jun-seok is currently ahead of Democratic Party's Kwoung District and People Power Party's Han Jung-min. Now let's move down to Bundang-A in Gyeonggi-do Province, where the two candidates have been very neck and neck since the campaigning period. We're still seeing them in a very tight race as of 11 p.m. We have Democratic Party's Lee Kwang-jae and we have People Power Party's An Chol-soo. As of 11 p.m., incumbent An is currently leading the race. Now let's head to the south of the country to Yangsan-bi in Gyeongsangnam-do Province, another highly contested area, which is also part of Korea's so-called Nakdonggang River Belt. So in the race between Democratic Party's Kim Do-kwan and People Power Party's Kim Tae-ho, what's interesting is that both candidates have served as governors of Gyeongsangnam-do Province. As of 11 p.m., Kim Tae-ho is in the lead. And last but not least, let's move to Gwangju, Gwangsam-bi. We have three candidates here. We have Democratic Party's Min Hyung-bae, People Power Party's An Tae-wook, and former Prime Minister who's also the leader of Seminet Party Lee Na-kyun. As of 11 p.m., we can see that Democratic Party's Min Hyung-bae is highly likely to win a seat to the National Assembly. But I want to mention that these results may change. As Soo-jin mentioned in her live cross, more ballots are being counted throughout the night, so I'll be back. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Chiyoung.
Thank you, Eugene, for that. Now we turn to Professor Shettle and our correspondent Kim Do-yeon to decipher the numbers in the regions that we should keep an eye on. So Professor Shettle, let's start with Kwoung District in Incheon, where main opposition Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung and the ruling People Party's Won Hee-ryong are having the so-called Myeongyong battle. What are the implications of the outcome in Kwoung District in Incheon?
Well, we have a victory, it seems, in the making for Lee Jae-myung. And of course, this is interesting and important, I think, not just for Lee, but for the DP, because it shows that at least in that district, we have a vote of confidence not only for the party, but for the specific candidate. And despite all of the difficulties and allegations of corruption that have plagued Lee Jae-myung over the past few years since his presidential campaign, and that probably will continue to plague him going forward, the district is standing behind him. And in some ways, this election has been a test of Lee Jae-myung as the leading figure of that party, and he seems to have survived it. So that in itself is very interesting. Incheon, we're seeing in the numbers overall, this election cycle is very strongly in the DP's favor. So I suppose Lee Jae-myung's detractors will want to suggest that this is an area that was disposed to vote for DP regardless of who was leading it. I believe there are only two districts in Incheon that as of about an hour ago were projected to go to the PPP. And yes, in the past, this area is also heavily gone for the DP. So the trend seems intact, and those that worried about Lee Jae-myung possibly being a kind of drain on the effect of the DP this time around, those fears seem not to be materializing at the moment.
Right, Professor, as you said, DP seems to be leading in that district. Now, going over to you, Do-yeon, staying with the districts in Seoul, Yongsan-gu District, sitting across what's called the Hangang Belt or Han River Belt, is also one of the regions that has been gaining much attention. I mean, why has it been a hot spot? And what are some of the major developments there?
It's a hot spot because the district where the president resides is called the #1 district for the politics of the country, right? But President Yoon, about a year and a half ago, moved to Yongsan-gu District for his residence from Cheongwade, right? That's where the president used to live, which was Chongno-gu District. Now, so that means it carries that significance. And we saw Eugene kind of give us the latest update. We saw PPP's Kwon Young-se, who's the incumbent, and also former Minister of Unification, leading the race. Leading up to this election, the polls kind of saw the two neck and neck at the district, and it posed a lot of messages, I would say, because you're basically saying that these voters are the president's neighbors, right? So that kind of shows how that's kind of a different way to look at the voter preference in this district. But PPP is leading, and it seems like Kwon Young-se could retain his position, but we'll have to see. Yeah.
Right, we'll have to see what happens throughout the night. And Professor Shettle, how significant is taking the lead in the Hangang Riverbelt regions and regions in the greater capital area of Gyeonggi-do province to both parties?
Right. Several of these regions are seen as swing districts, districts that could go either way, districts that were maybe polling in advance of the election within a margin of error. And what we're seeing tonight, especially in Seoul, is pretty much more of the same emerging, with maybe a slight tilt in favor of the DP overall. I believe Yeongsan-gu, along with Gangbuk-gu in the northeast section of Seoul, these were the only two districts in the city of Seoul north of the river, the whole section that we would call Gangbuk altogether, that were in line with the PPP. Every other north of the river district tonight was with the DP, with the exception of that Riverside Yeongsan-gu district. So Yeongsan really did stand out in interesting ways tonight. I wondered if the voters in Yeongsan-gu would punish President Yoon for moving there, since I understand it's created a lot more traffic headaches for them over the last few years. But it seems that Yeongsan-gu, for various reasons, maybe it's a more affluent district than some of its neighbors north of the river, that district is leaning conservative. And we're also seeing that the voting patterns in Yeongsan-gu now are turning out, at least for this election, a bad election for the conservatives, one they're going to be pretty keen to forget, or at least learn from down the road. Yeongsan-gu, nevertheless, seems to have voted in a similar way as three districts south of the river that also typically vote conservative in Seoul. And here I'm talking about Socho-gu, Songpa-gu, and Gangnam-gu. And those three, true to form, tonight also voted for the conservative side. Whereas to the west of them, well, Dongjak-gu, it's being projected now, at least as we heard from Yujin, that Na Kyung-won is going to hold her seat there. There have been some numbers on Yonhap news agency earlier in the evening reporting otherwise, reporting that she might have a hard time holding on to those numbers. So Dongjak-gu may join those other districts that I just mentioned south of the river going conservative, but southwest, in different areas, I believe, west of Yeongdong-pogu, which may also end up conservative, but when you start to head further out toward where younger people live, the more recently developed areas, Gangso-gu and so on, so further out, those may end up voting in favor of the DP as well. And the numbers in Gyeonggi-do, south of the city, in the high-tech regions, are also very interesting, because it sounds as if Bundang has opted for An Chol-soo, but again, somebody who cast his lot with President Yoon was a little bit of a kingmaker of sorts in the 2022 presidential election. But in some of the other districts and other cities where younger people tend to go, where younger people have been priced out of living in, living in districts closer to Seoul, where they go to save money on housing, or where you have a lot of younger high-tech workers, there may be some movement there against the PPP and against President Yoon, sending a chastening message to the president. And that'll be another bigger question when we parse all these regional numbers. Is it a punishment for the president this election, or is it a vote of confidence in the DP? It may turn out to be neither. So yes, this accident of timing where President Yoon does actually get a midterm election, unlike many other presidents, given the way the calendar worked out, it's very interesting, because not every president gets this kind of midterm verdict. But that is something that we're going to have to be looking at, is how do the different regions and how do the different age brackets play out in terms of their confidence or lack thereof in the president. And at that point, we'll be able to figure out if the president has become a lame duck of sorts tonight.
Right. And what about other regions that we should focus on nationwide?
Well, to give you a very crude picture of it, and I know the numbers are still coming in, but the nationwide map that I was looking at before coming in the studio tonight, and again, this is typically, I think, with about 3/4 of the votes reported, so some of these numbers could change. But it was striking to me to see how blue the western half of the country was, and how red the eastern half of the country was. And in some ways, this has been typical in recent election cycles. We know that the southwest region votes very reliably. DP, this is, of course, the stronghold for Kim Dae-jung and many of his other colleagues in the progressive side of politics historically here in Korea. Whereas the east side and the southeast especially, Busan and Daegu, and even increasingly, I think, Gangneung and Sokcho and some of the districts up and down the east coast of the country are more willing to keep the PPP in power. And that pattern seems intact. I mean, if you look at a map geographically of the country, the PPP seems to be doing fairly well, holding the majorities in its usual strongholds outside of the capital. So the regional fault lines seem to be intact in this election. I'm sure we'll see some exceptions in various districts. I think the really interesting thing, and again, we have to remember that half the population now lives within Seoul and Gyeonggi-do, you know, the capital city, and then the suburban, if we call it that, belt around the capital. And that's really where I think a lot of the battleground is now nationally, because you've got the younger voters there, the more affluent voters there, you've got half the country's population there. So one sobering note for the PPP is they're doing well in areas of the country that are losing population. And in the capital and surrounding regions, which continue remarkably to gain population, or at least not lose population, there, the PPP and the Conservative Party are having a harder time holding on cycle by cycle.
Right, Professor, as you said, many factors are playing, informing of the outcome. Right, and moving on to how people in other countries are taking in this election. Media overseas is also keeping a close eye on South Korea's parliamentary elections, as multiple outlets say the opposition's overwhelming lead in the election will set the tone for the rest of the president's term. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
The parliamentary elections have received a great deal of attention beyond South Korea's own borders. Foreign media outlets have highlighted that Wednesday's election is a crucial test for President Yoon Suk-yeol. After the polls closed at 6 p.m., the New York Times reported that the president is facing the threat of being a lame duck for the remaining 3 years in office. One expert told the Associated Press that Yoon, who has been grappling with low approval ratings, would find it difficult to move forward even a single step on state affairs. Another expert told Reuters that this election is a retrospective of the president's performance, rather than a choice about future policy issues. Several foreign media outlets, including the British newspaper The Guardian, highlighted what's been dubbed as the Green Onion outcry, which ignited voter anger in South Korea. Sources reported that the president and his party felt the heat after visiting a supermarket last month with the intention of promoting government efforts to lift financial pressures. Yoon had said less than $1 for a bundle of green onions is a reasonable price when the actual retail price is 3 or 4 times more. Foreign media outlets said that this made the president appear out of touch amid a lack of real progress to stabilize prices and livelihoods. Corruption allegations have also been a topic of interest overseas. Reuters and Al Jazeera underlined the Dior bag scandal, involving the accusation that First Lady Kim Gun-hee broke the law by accepting a Dior bag as a gift. Reuters also mentioned that Yoon faced a backlash after appointing former Defense Minister Lee Jong-seop as the country's ambassador to Australia, while Lee was under a corruption probe. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera has pointed out that the main opposition Democratic Party is not free from such issues, with the party's chairman Lee Jae-myung facing corruption charges. And despite escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula, Reuters and AFP reported that North Korea is not a major issue in the election. Reuters said little change is expected in the diplomatic arena, whatever the result. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
In this election, voters have been given a ballot paper that's even longer than the previous election in 2020, making it the longest ever ballot paper used in the country. Our Bae Eun-ji touches upon some of the interesting factors of this race based on the numbers.
The general election is South Korea's biggest political event this year. You might be wondering how it works and what's different in 2024. Let's take a look at the election by the numbers. The voting age in South Korea is 18 after the country lowered the age limit from 19 in December 2019. Citizens born before April 11, 2006 are eligible to vote in this year's general election.
This means more than 44 million Koreans will be heading to almost 15,000 polling stations across the country. That'll be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There, voters will receive 2 ballot papers. One is to vote for a candidate running for their constituency, and the other is to vote for the party they support for proportional representation seats. This year, the ballot papers for proportional representation seats are the longest ever used in Korea. It's 51.7 centimeters long, as 38 parties have registered to battle over these seats. This is even longer than the last election in 2020, when the ballot paper was over 48 centimeters long, with 35 parties running. Before that, in 2016 and in 2012, the papers were about 30 centimeters. Just as in the 2020 election, the votes will have to be counted by hand, as electronic counters cannot read papers this long. Moving on to the candidates running for individual districts, the average competition rate stands at around 2.8 to 1 this year, the lowest in 39 years. In 2020, the rate was 4.4 to 1. Of the 699 candidates that have registered in 254 districts nationwide, 86% are men, leaving women as an unrepresentative minority. The average age of the candidates is 56.8, 2 years older than in 2020. Those in their 50s took up nearly half of the candidates, followed by those in their 60s and 40s. The youngest candidate is 28 years old, whereas the oldest is 85, born in 1938. By job, 65% of the candidates were professional politicians, 8% were attorneys, and 5% were professors or educators. Doctors and pharmacists accounted for about 1% of the total. The vote count for this year's election is expected to take about 2 more hours than usual and will likely have the final results at around 2 a.m. the next day.
For more on how this year's election played out, let's once again turn to our reporter Song Yoo-jin at Arirang's virtual reality studio. Yoo-jin?
Well, Ji-young, I'm back here at Arirang's brand new VR studio. So now let's take an even closer look into the voter turnout, an even closer look than our 6 p.m. newscast. So starting with how many people voted this time. So data as of 11 p.m. from the National Election Commission shows that 67% of the nation's eligible voters voted for the 22nd general election. Now, this translates to more than 29 million voters voting actually out of the 44.28 million eligible voters. By eligible, we mean those born on or before April 11, 2006. And I also want to mention that this is, in fact, the highest turnout after the 14th general election in 1992. So let's compare this number with that of the past 5 general elections. So here we have a line graph from the 2004 general elections. Of course, that of 2024, though it's an estimate, is the highest. We have 60.6% in 2004. We did see a decrease in 2008 to 46.1%, which experts attribute that because the then Lee Myung-bak administration was at its honeymoon period, and also the weather was really raining bad that day. We did still see the figure rebound from 2012, 54.2%, then to 58% in 2016, and then 66.2% in 2020. Now, I want to mention that this 67%, it's a forecast, and the National Election Commission will announce the final voter turnout a few hours in the morning. Now let's turn to the regional voter turnout. In other words, how many people voted region by region. So here we divided Korea into 17 provinces and cities, and the data shows that, of course, as of 11 p.m., Sejong City that you see in the center left has shown the highest voter turnout in the country, and followed by capital Seoul and many more regions. And now let's move on by taking a look at the hourly breakdown of the voter participation here in the country. As you know, the voting started at 6 a.m. sharp, and the first turnout was reported at 7 a.m. by the National Election Commission, reporting, as you can see from here, 1.8%. We saw the voter turnout gradually increasing by 2 to 3 percentage points. But what's interesting is that we saw it jump to passing 50%, 53.4% at 1 p.m. And that a large part of this almost 35 percentage point jump is due to early voting figures being added. And then we saw as you can see, the voter turnout steadily increasing once again by 2 to 3 percentage points in the afternoon, leading to a final estimated nationwide voter turnout of this general election of 67%. So last but not least, let's compare this graph with that of the previous general election that took place in 2020. So here we have the hourly voter turnout of 2024 in orange, and then we have that of 2020 in black. As you can see, a lot of parts of the graph are overlapping, but in the end, though the 2024 voter turnout is an estimate as of now, we have a 0.8 percentage point difference between that of 2020. And what's interesting is that we saw the 2020 voter turnout actually being larger than that of 2024 during the early voting hours. That was during the morning hours, but we saw the result being flipped from 1 p.m., which is once again highly likely due to this year's record-breaking early voter turnout of almost 31.3%. Once again, this led to the estimated final difference of 0.8 percentage points. We'll get the exact and final data once again when the national election announces it in the morning. Now, I'll leave further analysis and in-depth discussions about this to the studio. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Jiyoung.
Thank you, Eugene. Now let's delve deeper into the voter turnout and the implications of this election. So, Professor Shettle, how do you expect the voter turnout that we have so far to affect the election results?
Well, it's a good turnout. And I think before we really will have a sense on how the numbers of voters showing up impacted the results, we'll need to know more about age. All those different segmentations of the times people voted and so forth that we just saw, very interesting. But I'm sitting here watching the numbers, wondering if the strong showing nationally tonight for the DP suggests that the voter turnout was relatively high for middle-aged voters. If we looked at the presidential election a couple of years ago, people in their 40s and 50s are the ones that we saw in that election that tended to vote DP. Whereas people in their 60s and up tended to vote for PPP, vote conservative, and people in their 20s and 30s were split. So given that we have such a strong showing tonight nationally for the DP, it suggests that the voter turnout might have been especially heavy with middle-aged voters, even young to middle-aged voters, ready to stick it to the PPP and send a negative message to the president. The other possibility is that we might have seen either some older voters, some segments of older voters turning against the president, or we might be seeing in the 20-something bracket a shift among male voters. If we go back to 2022, we remember that I think about 60% of male voters in that age bracket were voting for President Yoon in that election, whereas about 60% of female voters are voting for Lee Jae-myung. But there have been some reports that the younger male voters who don't necessarily feel any better off over the past 2 years under President Yoon may be looking for alternatives now. Whether they went to the DP or whether they went to some of the offshoot third parties, we don't yet know. But that may give us a bit of a clue when we start to see those age numbers segmented out as to why people voted the way they did, and also what the trends might be telling us for the future directions of politics in this country. But it does seem, one last thing, from the early voting numbers, it seemed the early voting was tilted pretty heavily toward people 50 and over. About 44% of the early voting came from people 50 to 60 and 60 up. Whereas younger voters were underrepresented in the early voting. Only about 12% of the younger voters under 30, I believe, turned out early. So either we had the holiday bringing out a lot of the younger people today, or we had middle-aged citizens of this country sending a very strong message to the president and his ruling party.
All right, Professor, and before we wrap up, I want to ask you about your thoughts on this general election overall.
Well, if we look at it in terms of personalities, I think, first of all, for President Yoon, it's never a good thing when the midterm election goes mainly in support of the opposition party. So President Yoon has got some fences to mend as best as he can try to mend them, I think, not just with people in the DP that are going to be hard to work with. Maybe he won't be trying to mend any fences at all. I'm not really sure. But if he doesn't mend any fences, he's stuck in a stalemate. He also has to, I think, somehow convince the country that he's got a clear direction going forward and that he can be president for all the people, because there was definitely a Stop President Yoon contingent voting tonight. As for the DP and Lee Jae-myung, this suggests that the DP is in fairly good momentum right now going forward to the next presidential election. Whether or not Lee Jae-myung will retain that momentum personally, I think depends on what develops with the various allegations against him. It doesn't help the DP that their current leader is under such a cloud of suspicion. Again, it suggests that both parties really have some negatives with the voters right now. So I don't want to give the DP a clear sailing signal either. One last thing for Han Dong-hoon, who was basically the president's delegate in this election. He was considered to be a possible contender for the presidency in the next presidential election if he did well tonight, but it seems that he's done below expectations. And temperamentally, he's very different than Yoon. He's quite a bit younger than Yoon. At least he represents, it seems, a younger generation than the president. And many were thinking this might be a debonair alternative to the president going forward, that if Han Dong-hoon came out strong in this election, it would help the PPP, consolidate support behind him for the next presidential election. But that is now in question as well. So I think both parties are going to have a lot of careful thinking and searching to look ahead to who their leaders might be. We don't really have a clear leader in either party looking ahead to the next presidential election in 3 years.
Right, we'll have to wait and see what happens. And it's going to be a long night for many here in South Korea as we wait to find out how the results turn out. Thank you, Do-yeon, our political correspondent, for this thorough coverage of this election night. And Professor Hans Schettel, Professor of Political Science at Yonsei University. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, in the next few hours, who gets to be part of South Korea's 22nd National Assembly will be decided, a pivotal moment for the nation's future. This April 10th general election signifies the power of democracy in South Korea, where every voice counts. That does it for our special coverage of this election. Thank you for watching. We'll bring you more updates at 9 a.m. with New Day at Arirang.
지정학적 갈등이 심화되고 있는 현 국제 정세 가운데에서 우리나라 동포들이 느끼고 있는 불안감이 상당히 큽니다. 이러한 불안감이 조금이라도 덜어지는 사회 분위기를 형성하는 데 일조해 주실 것으로 기대합니다.
스웨덴에 살면서 행복하게 뛰어노는 아이들과 가족들을 많이 보게 되는데요. 한국 사회에도 이러한 가족들이 많아질 수 있도록 부모 간에 평등하게 아이를 책임질 수 있는 사회와 아이들이 충분히 넉넉하게 행복할 수 있는 환경을 위해 노력해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
분열이 발생하고 갈등이 이전보다 더 격해진 것 같습니다. 특정 집단이나 특정 인물이 아닌 국민 모두를 위한 국회가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
대도시가 아닌 지역에 거주하는 제 국민들은 투표 하나를 하기 위해서 큰 돈 혹은 시간을 써서 그 투표소에 가서 이제 투표를 해야 하는 고충이 있습니다. 투표소가 더 많이 만들어졌으면 좋겠다라는 생각을 하고 또한 제 국민이 투표를 하려면은 사전 신청을 해야 되는데 이러한 면들이 더 많이 홍보가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
한국에서 합법적으로 외국인 근로자로 취업할 수 있는 법적 근거를 만들어 주시면 좋겠습니다. 또한 이주 여성들이 조금 더 전문적인 일자리에 예를 들어 심리상담사, 이주 여성 동료 심리상담사 같은 일자리에 진출할 수 있는 기반을 만들어 주시면 좋겠습니다.